Hey everyone, welcome to this month's webinar. I usually don't do tool-based webinars. Um, this is sort of one. I'll explain why. I gave this short talk about a few months ago, and people found it illuminating, so I'm doing it now for a wider audience, and it's obviously going to be about Postman. Hope you enjoy it. Bit about me. My name is Gil. I'm testing Gil. I'm also from Israel, so I hope we won't have any sirens while we're doing this. But if I kind of jump up and go, that's probably what happened. I'm the author of two books. I'm a consultant and a trainer about all things that help make software better. That includes working with developers, testers, and what we're doing today, what we're going to talk about today is something that I teach. I'm doing workshops on that for both testers and developers. And what I'll try to do today is you can't really talk about Postman in an hour. I am going to talk about how it helps our work. So I'm going to start talking about HTTP request, what are REST APIs, and then I'm going to do a short tour around the features of Postman and kind of connect these things and basically talk about how these things help our work or may not help our work, which is kind of something that's very interesting for people because you kind of think about Postman is kind of today the go-to tool for everyone. So if you're considering working with it, it is a great tool. I have the shirt here to prove it. But you need to know what you're getting into because it has some limitation, let's call it, that may not fit the way you work. So it's interesting and probably important to know about that. For more information about these courses, the workshops, let me know. Go to the site, testinghill.com or everydayunitesting.com, and hit me up on one of the channels. Let's talk about it. Okay, so first let's talk about APIs. What are APIs? We had you can open whatever electronic media you're hopefully reading. You'll hear our APIs. APIs have been around since, I don't know, 70s, something like that. So whenever a computer program tries to talk to another program, it does this through an API, an application programming interface, a connection between computers, between computer programs. This is out of Wikipedia, of course. So a type of software interface offering a service to other pieces of software. That is basically everything that exposes an API. Doesn't have to be like a REST API, which we'll talk about today. Libraries expose APIs. Somebody's going to use them. If you're using, I don't know, whatever you're building your application in, it usually uses some kind of frameworks. I'm currently writing something with Next.js. It has APIs. Spring has a lot of APIs. I did that in Java. Everything you have today, you don't write from scratch, and therefore some piece of software will try to talk to the other piece of software. They do that through APIs. In our context today, these days, we're talking about REST APIs. Now, REST is something not going to do the whole representational blah, blah, blah stuff. What we do need to know about REST APIs is that most of the world is working with REST. REST is an architecture. It's not a standard. You may have bumped into that with other types of interfaces like web services. Postman, by the way, works with GraphQL, for example. It's not. It's like REST. It's not an architecture. It's an architecture. It's not a way to write standard APIs. Postman, by the way, supports also gRPC. Did recently, which is a different beast altogether. The idea about REST is that it's an architecture. Basically, the way our internet works is something like that. So you have clients, you have servers, and servers have other servers or databases to talk to. And the communication is done through HTTP. And you probably use that, so you're using JSON or XML for your applications. And the cool things about APIs, the REST API, the REST architecture, is that you don't have to write a lot of code because everyone's using that. There are a lot of frameworks that actually are built to help you build these kind of things. So it is kind of a chicken and the egg thing. If everyone is doing that, there'll be tools for that. If there are tools for that, everybody will be doing that. And that's okay and great. So REST is not a standard, but it uses a lot of standards. HTTP is a standard. SOAP, you may have heard that in the context of web services, is a standard. XML, JSONs are standards. And the more standards there are, more computers can talk to each other in the same way. So that's cool. So if you hear REST APIs, the most common thing you will find today, because they're HTTP based, that means that they are heavy in terms of payload. They're text intensive, like if you've seen like a very big JSON thing or HTML, you know what I'm talking about. Applications and frameworks try to help us write less of that, but it's still that. gRPC, for example, which was made by Google, is binary based. It's smaller, it's custom, but you have to define how it looks like because both client and server need to talk to each other in the way that they will understand. So HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, has been around, as we know, from the 70s. It really is the basis of communication and communication of upon the REST architecture. And basically, we're talking about client-server communication. So we have requests, we have responses. One of the things that HTTP has inside it, or a premise that has inside it, is that it doesn't have any memory. So if you're sending the same request twice, if you're looking at the HTTP level, the second request doesn't know that there was a first request. It allows the REST architecture to grow because that means the memory of, if we want something, is done in the application level. So that makes HTTP very lean in terms of what we're sending, but the context of what we're sending is done at the application level, and that makes it very useful. Basically, a request, an HTTP request or a REST request, and the way it's written in this slide, has 4 components. First of all, it has the HTTP method. HTTP has 3 things: the method, the post, get, whatever, the URL where it goes to, and some media or payload that we call this the body. For an HTTP request, we have 4 components: the method itself, the post, the get, delete, whatever, patch, the URL. Note that the way it works, what you see today is basically an output of a text-based like tools like curl. If you use that, you do that, things are being sent, and there's a separation between the server that you're actually sending to and the reference or dereferenced URL, the relative URL in it. But that's the endpoint where we're talking to. There are a couple of header fields. This is a list or a dictionary of fields that we're sending. We'll see how it looks like in Postman soon. And a body. It could be JSON. It could be text, XML, could be binary, an image, something like that. Could be a stream of things, like a stream of request. So we're sending this to the server. Server needs to understand what we actually send it. By the way, this is why we have headers. Headers help us understand what we're sending. So if we have content type here, application JSON, that means to the server, well, I got a piece of text. How do I read it? In which language? So, JSON, I can do something with that. For each request, usually a response. There's always a response, unless it kind of lost its way. So you get a status code. 200 usually means great, or it's a family. 201, it's a create. Or 400, which is something that is wrong. And 500 means something is wrong with the server. And the body, it doesn't have to always have a body. Sometimes it also has some kind of headers with it. For example, in this example, it tells you that what I'm sending back is HTML. This is how the client should read it. By the way, different clients may do something different with that. For example, if we're sending something binary, an image, for example, back, which is possible to do, a client which is text-based may not know how to do this. We'll see that Postman has a sort of an in-browser in it, an internal browser that can show you HTML. It renders the HTML to something graphical, but not everything has everything. So that means we have a lot of questions. What happens if we ask for something that the server can't do? What if the server always returns JSON, but the client doesn't understand JSON? Can happen. Before we dive into the tool, this is something that I always show in terms of tools. This is Michelangelo. Might have heard of him. He used to be Turtle, but not today. And people ask him, how can we be as good as you are? And one of the last frames asks, what kind of chisel do I need to buy in order to be as good as you? Tools don't make good application or good testing or whatever. They help, but they need to be helpful. They need to fit into our goals or what we want to achieve. And they need to help us not only make them work for us, they need to actually help us with the entire context of how we work. I'll talk about that as well. That's the red light around Postman. But we'll see what are the strengths and what are not. Postman, basically, we kind of think about it like a testing tool, but it does other stuff. It does three things, basically. First, it executes requests. We kind of think, well, this is exactly as testing. No. First of all, it executes the requests, and let us see what's been sent, what we got back, and that's the basis of testing, right? We need to see with our eyes. What Postman calls testing, we'll see that as well, is the ability to code asserts or expectations so that we can run them as tests. Because Postman running a request that returns a 404 and not found is completely okay. It's not something that is failed, unless we tell us 404 is not okay. So execution and testing. And the third part is something that some people do. I didn't see a lot of people actually do that. And that is design APIs within Postman. That means we need to dive a bit about what are APIs. APIs, like we said, are interfaces. There's code behind them. So it is possible to define them separately from the code. Developers don't do that. They kind of mix them together. So these are the APIs. I'm using a framework like, I don't know, Next or Spring or whatever. It just does its magic and it exposes APIs. So I did the design and I also did the code behind it and didn't separate the works. It is possible to design it like interfaces like in Word or in Postman. No code behind it, but the definition is there. And Postman does nice things with that. So you can actually define your interfaces and create some. If this is my response, let's create an example response from it so we can use this mock when we're testing that. So it does that. I didn't see a lot of people do that today. It's there. Postman has all kinds of things for sharing, all kinds of examples and APIs and tests or whatever. But that's not its main thing. It's a cloud-based product, which is good or not. We'll talk about that. And let's almost jump in. I want to mention that in terms of testing, what we're doing. We're running tests or execution requests on the left side. Well, there is something going on in the inside, what we're actually testing. This something consists of three things. The API code, what it calls, it could be a database or another server or another microservice, it doesn't really matter, but it has some kind of dependencies. And all this run in an environment. And this could be local environment, everything on my computer, it could be like a staged environment, like a pre-production thing, or it could be against production. And all this setup, Postman or any client doesn't care about that. Sure, it needs to know where to go through, but we're kind of left on the left side, but we need to know what happens on the right side because we need to know we're testing against a pre-production thing, but this is the testing area, but we may run the same tests on the development shared area, which is not the same. Okay, we might get different results. We need different responses. We might need to run differently, like on the dev area, things will be a lot more fragile than in the pre-production area. We need to know what we're testing. Okay, let's go post. So I'm going to Postman. And let's see what Postman does. Basically, Postman, like I said, it's a client. You can download it because it's a cloud-based. You can actually work and log in from your browser and see the same things. And that's very cool. That means that it's not tied to your computer. Everything's saved somewhere in the cloud, which is good, maybe not so good. We'll talk about that. The main thing that you manage in Postman are workspaces. All you see here is one workspace. What you see here are the collections in this workspace. That's the second tier of what you're managing. And under a collection, which is basically one unit, everything we'll see exists in a collection. You can have like multiple folders like this, and within these folders you can have more folders and more folders. I haven't checked the limit. And the final building block is a request. So this is a request. When you click on one, things change on the right hand side of the screen. For a request, you can select whatever method you're doing. These are the most common one, and the get and post and patch and so on. And you put in the server, and I'm using today JSON placeholder, which I kind of tested like a few minutes ago, which works. The server, including everything. This one doesn't have parameters, but a query parameters like a question, but I can add something here. For example, add a parameter like ID, which is 7, and it knows to do that. Or if I change that for 8, it will change here. So query parameters are kind of built in there. What I'll do, it has also some kind of memory of what you typed before, which is cool. If we send this request, it sends out. This returns a JSON. This is live. It actually went to the server, got a 200. You can save it as an example and show it, and it's kind of sort of remembered offline. And you can use this to mock or to show. This is the JSON. You can see that we got JSON back. It's highlighted. It's pretty to see. It's not like you can see it in the raw. What actually came back with everything. No, it has some highlighting, but pretty means it's formatted, and we can see more quickly what happened here. It shows everything, the entire JSON, which is quite long here. If I had it shows what was returned, and that's basically what it does. You can send a post request, and when you send a post request, it usually accompanies with a body. So you saw the tabs here for each request. They repeat themselves. Usually when I want to send something in a body, I will send a raw, and I will send from here what I'm sending. Could be like JSON, XML, HTML, whatever. And remember, this tells the server how to read this. So when I do this, what actually is I have a tab for the headers. These are the request headers that get sent. Some of them are like disabled, more custom thing, but you see the black ones are the default ones, and content types is application JSON, which means that if I send, for example, I decide to send it as, I don't know, I want to send it as XML, telling them, when you get this, read it as it was XML. What will happen in the headers is that it will send the application XML. This is to control the conflict that you probably don't want. So when we do this, for example, I'm going to send this. I'm getting 201 status code created. I got what I sent, an ID, new ID, which I can use, maybe. That's the basic of things. You also responses do have headers as well. These are what gets back from the thing. You see, there's a lot of things here. The content type is application JSON, UTF-8. Content length, we didn't talk about this. How big is the body? Computers talk to computers, so they need to allocate memory for what's coming in. They don't know how much, so the headers tell them. And a lot of things here. Cookies, if they were sent or not, you can send cookies as well, whatever is on your computer or in your Postman environment. That's the basics. Now, all this is for executing requests. We usually need a bit more than that. Because, and that's nice, but first of all, I want a bit more automation. But mostly I won't be like checking requests by themselves. Usually we're talking about features. Features are multiple requests, like something going on, like I'm creating something and getting an ID for that. We'll see that in a minute. I want to mention something here about the grouping of this. Naming, you can call it whatever you want. You can, it doesn't automatically sort it for you. Whatever you write it, like post, I don't know, post 2, it will save in this order. And of course, see, changed. And you can change, move things around, duplicate them. The full toolbox for editing text. Yeah, so let's talk about variables, because these are the basic block of multiple requests. So how do I do that? So I have, okay, so let's say I have this query, doesn't remember do anything because user ID doesn't exist, doesn't really matter, but I have a parameter here, which this thing I'd like to wrap in a variable. You see that as I selected it, the floating window appeared and asked me to, do you want to set it as a variable? Now I can select whatever pieces of code text here. Okay, that doesn't really know that it's what it's going to be. As I'm going to set a variable, it tells me these are the existing ones, which I didn't save, and do I want to use them, or do I want to set a new variable? I'm going to select this one, and let's send it again. Same thing. How do I know what it sent? Okay, so because it doesn't appear. If I hover around it, do I trust it? The answer is no, I don't trust it. There's the console. You see there at the bottom, the console window, I clear it. And every request that goes out, the console logs. So this is basically our basic debugging tool. You can see that it went with a get to this, and it kind of put in the variable in there. This is complete text. It just embeds the text that it was before, and under that I can see whatever happened for every request. Doesn't matter if I'm using variables or not. From the network level, which is my computer, and then the target computer, so on. And the request headers, what was sent, the request headers, and the response body, which was kind of nothing here. Everything is logged in the console. That's basically our when we start if something that goes wrong. Now, where is this thing stored? Okay, so for each collection, I will stand on top of the collection. There's tab called variables. These are the collection variables. And as you can see, it's empty. Where did it take the ID? Okay, now you see that there's something called conflict here. This is the collection, but there's a conflict because there's another tab, which I don't know where it is. I don't want to share with ease. If I try to close everything, force close everything. Yes, I do want to force close. It will actually close everything. And the tab mechanism, and this is what I didn't say before, it kind of opened up a new tab when I clicked again on things. The idea of multiple tabs is something that it's part of Postman, and this can be very confusing. It is more confusing if you don't know about a new feature, which is called autosave, which actually saves stuff when you're sending it. But what I have right now is basically something that I updated, although it looked like it didn't exist. When we do stuff, it is very, very important to save them. Okay, so if, for example, I go to my post, and I don't know, I want to create a new variable, I can create a for thing, and it lets me select the scope. I can select global scope, something that workspace wide, or in the collection. There's also the environments, which is kind of a feature that I'm not going to talk about today. We can have things like that as well. So you can see that if I send this, it actually saved it. So because it didn't change. Let's do something here. You see that the save button becomes enabled. It's not saving automatically in my mode. So the tabs, we'll talk about that also at the end. It can be very confusing because it's very easy to open new tabs all the time. You just click something, a new tab opens, and you can create conflicts within these tabs. Okay, you can use variables inside a body because it's text, you can embed it. So that's with double braces. Same we use in with this variable as well. here, double braces, name of that. That's basically variables, and that's, like I said, it's the basic building block of passing things around between requests, because once I create a variable, it's available for every request. Now, what I did until now was embed things in the request, which is nice, but sometimes I need more than that. For example, if I'm doing a post request like this one, and it returns an ID, I would like to get the ID here, to keep it, to use it for a workflow. What you see in a workflow is something that you probably would do as part of your thing. So you basically create a record and then get a record by this ID and then delete it maybe. So if this workflow works, then it is okay, but we need to do something about it and store things in variables, get them from variables. The way we do this is basically two names that Postman has chosen to use, which are not the same, but we'll talk about them in the names. But the concept is code that runs before the request, which is code that runs before the request, called pre-request script, and code that runs after the request, which is called tests. Yes, it is confusing. And I'm kind of... Okay, let's look at it. So this creates a record like before, let's call it. Now, this returns an ID. So I need to use this ID. How do I do that? Well, I can go to my tests, and you see here, first of all, I have snippets. This is where I can run code. The code that I can run is Node, JavaScript, and I want to store something inside a variable. So the way I'll do that is I'm going to, first of all, I want to get the response value. So basically, I do that, and you see it already creates a script of tests for me. I don't need a test right now because a test has something else in terms of meaning, like failure and success. I just need a script. So I can use this, which creates a JSON data for me, and I want JSON value ID. Okay. And I want, PM is Postman, of course. I want PM set. Let's set a collection variable. So a bit of editing, I know. Set what get with this. So basically what I'm doing is, and this is called the ID. You can see it knows what variables exist. Let me use it. And basically what I do is this. I'm getting the JSON data, extracting the ID from it, and setting it. Let's save for it so we can actually do that. So we're expecting here that the ID will be, let's look at the response again, 101. Right? Let's look at the collection variable and see if that has changed. The ID now is 101, which is good. Now I can use the ID flag here, and it will. And this is like what you see here is I'm sending the ID here, but you can see that in the pre-request code, I'm actually kind of fumbling this. If I just send 101, what will happen is that I'll get an error. I know. So what I'm doing is that I'm creating a new ID instead of the ID. So I'm getting the ID, 101, subtracting 1, put this in the new ID variable. And then I can use the new ID and run this, and you'll see that what gets sent is actually 100. You can see it. I got 100 back. So this way I can like do stuff with variables and move them around, store them and use them. I can do a lot of things with that. The test code, you've seen this one already. This is a test. pm.test is a test, something that can actually fail if I run it. I'll show you how to run it in a minute. So if I do this, do delete, and you see that I got an OK with 101 because I haven't changed it. And that's cool, but it doesn't really delete it, but that's okay. But I get the information that I need. And well, you say, well, where's the result of the test? Well, I got a 200, right? Let's see what happens when I got a 200. If I expect, I don't know, 201. Well, I got a 200. I checked for 201. Nobody tells me something has failed. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, Postman comes with something called a collection runner. You can see it at the bottom here. And you can run it basically on right-clicking on a folder or a collection, like this. See, run folder or run collection. So let's right-click, click on the workflows and say run folder. I'm going to run these three. It tells me, these are the ones you want going to run? Yes. Run the collection, with the folder, whatever. And here you can see an actual pass or failed for a test. Now, this collection runner is not the way you're supposed to do this. First of all, it's manual. And the second, there's a limit on that because Postman wants to earn some money, and he can lose some money if you click this. So we're talking about like 25, I think. It was 3 months ago. I'm not sure about today. 25 runs a month. So there's a counter that will tell you you're going to actually use up all these runs. So you need to know about this as well. Now, I've shown you most of the feature I want to show. Well, you can export something. You can't export everything. You can export variables and export the collection. So click on that, export, and what you'll see is this. Everything is saved in JSON, and you see everything in the collection is here. So the requests and the bodies of the requests and the responses if I save them, and where's my code? Remember we had some code in workflows. So get record, pre-request, there's the code, the PM collection variables, and also the collection variables are here as well. So everything gets saved here. We'll talk about saving in a minute. Why would you want to do this? And you probably want to do. Final thing I want to show you is the data-driven part. Up until now, I showed you how to use requests and how to use variables in requests. But sometimes you want a bit more. You want to write a request and run a test that with multiple parameters. You don't want to duplicate it. So that's data-driven test. That's the thing that the name of the feature in Postman. And what you need to do if you want to run it this way is, first of all, you need an external source. I'll show you in a minute a file. So for example, I'm going to run this from a CSV file. Where is yeah, I'll show you the content in a minute, but basically it's this thing. It could be a JSON, but a CSV file with the header and the values. And slides. Go back to data. In Postman, you need to have a separate collection for that. So let's go to Postman. Show you. So I prepared one, of course. This is the tour number 2. And you can see from you see a couple of things. First of all, the variable, you've seen that before. I showed you, if it's kind of has this red, bright red thing, it means that it doesn't understand, or it doesn't know the value. If I run this of this variable I defined, it's not in the collection, but you see it kind of put the whole name in there. So we don't want that. And what we are running is JSON placeholder with external ID and do something with expected status. So we see if we want to run something with an ID that exists, we want to get a 200, if not a 400. So how do I do that? I don't have a body or pre-request, just a get with this ID. So I need the collection running again. So I'm going to run this. This time you can see on the right hand side, I'm going to run manually, but I can select a file. So I'll select my file, and if it knows how to read it, it's a CSV of or something, it understands, it will give me a preview. And you can see that you have the things that it got from the file plus iterations, each one. So for the first one, it's going to put in 100 and then and 200, and compared to that, and for 104, we'd expect a 404. I'm going to clear that before I'm going to run, just so we'll see. Run this. And you can see that it got 2 past files. You see, I expected the 404 and for the 104, and I actually got a 404 for that. For the first one, for the 100, I got a 200. So, and it ran them as a test because I have a test there, and that's how you use it. Again, it counts as the runs in the collection run. Final thing I want to show you is, okay, if all this runs in the cloud and I have like a limit on the number of count of runs that I have, how do I run this automatically? In a CI, in continuous integration. And there's a separate application called Newman, which is a Node application, Node library, which you can read, download and use, and give it the command line. So go back here. This is Newman, as you know. And after you install Node and npm and install Newman, npm run the file. So if I run this in my command line, something like that, Newman run the collection file, which I exported, it will actually run it. And you'll see it gives us a text representation of whatever ran. And if there was an assertion error, the test failed, it will tell us. It has also the option to create a report like JUnit or any framework that you use. It's called JUnit XML, that whatever CI tool you're using, like Jenkins or TFS or whatever, it can read as test report. Okay, so this is like a very short run of the features, and I already start talking about how it helps and how it doesn't help. So first, I'm going to go back to my slides. The main thing about the power of Postman really is the visualization of what we're sending, what we're receiving, and it's easy to see what we're doing, and the all editing stuff is like very cool, very easy to do. Now comes the but it doesn't do well a couple of things. The first thing is because it's cloud-based, we already have a problem. Usually what we'd like to do is have like our code, and then we'd like to have our tests and put them in our source control and put a label on both of them. And that's it, right? And now we have versioning for both of them. It doesn't work with Postman like that because everything that we did, unless we exported it, which is the sort of a solution, is in the cloud. So we can't really version two things together. Now, this is, I think, the main problem with Postman, and they know that, so they try to do things to help you. For example, you have all kinds of integrations with Bitbucket and GitHub and stuff like that, that you can actually, it actually does do things for you with GitHub hooks or something like that. So it is possible to save things if your source control is somewhere in the cloud. It may not be the case for you. And that's a problem. So the workaround for that is to export the collection, put it in source control, and then label that with your code. But you have to remember to do that because it's a manual thing. So first of all, you need to be aware that this kind of conflict with the way we're running CI usually. Okay, next. It is running in the cloud, and I told you it allows me to run code before the request, after the request. Not every code. For example, I can't access my file system. First of all, because it's running somewhere in the cloud, and in terms of safety, it doesn't want you to write code that will access your file system. That's cool, but sometimes I need to have files. For example, in our data-driven example, I created a file that I wanted to input into Postman, and the data-driven mechanism actually does that and let me do that. But that's almost the only way. So if I want to like use variables outside with not a data-driven thing, I need to either do the data-driven thing and store these things in variables and run from there. The other way to do that is Postman has a command called pm.sendRequest that allows you to access a server, whatever server you want, in the pre-request or the test stage, which you can get a request out and to get something in, and that something you can put in variables and use it from there. That's cool, but whenever you're running this, you need the server to be running. So it needs to be available because you don't know when this test will actually run. And you need to maintain this server. It's not a Postman thing, it's your server. It needs to be up all the time. It needs to be maintained, it needs to be versioned in a way that makes sense for your tests. So that's a lot of work. I didn't see too many people do that. So that's a problem because we work with files, either input files or files that we want to reference to compare at the end. So you kind of need to work around the Postman features in order to do that. And the final thing is that everything about automations that you have to write code. We already saw examples, and the snippets is a big help. Really, like most of the code that you write is like get a snippet in there and you can actually use that. But I've seen people like abuse these things completely, like write components and classes and pre-requests that runs before every request and so on. there could be a lot of code in there. Now, that's not a problem with the tool. That's a problem with people. But maybe the JSON that you're returning needs a lot of excavation and tools and looping and stuff like that. And the problem is that Postman is not a development environment. It's not an IDE. It doesn't have any debugger. The console is the only thing. You'll spend a lot of time like writing to consoles, trying to figure out what happened here. It doesn't have a debugger. It has highlighting, but that's it. It doesn't have a linter. So there's a lot of power that you need when you're writing automation that Postman does not give you. And if you like go against it, you'll write a lot of code in Postman, and you spend a lot of time debugging it, making sure it's right. And again, it's not versioned unless you export this code as part of a collection and put a label on that. This kind of code is in that version. That means that if you're changing the data scheme of what you're returning, like the JSON, the code needs to adapt to that. You need this kind of thing in your source control in order to figure that out. The final thing that I have a problem with got solved a few months ago, the auto-saving part. So when it's now when you're saving stuff, when you're sending, it will save, but the tab problem is like a mess. You can really get lost in that. That's what I wanted to share with you today. So first of all, thanks for coming. I hope this was beneficial to you. Like every tool I talk about, make sure that play with it, see if it works for you. The people that use that for everything, I don't think they're doing a service to the work. It doesn't have to be the only tool on in your tool belt. You do need to know about it. There's a lot of examples out there that you can share through Postman in the network and the library, and you can find examples to how to do stuff that you actually need to do. It is a very ubiquitous tool, and I hope that if you decide on using that, you make sure it actually helps you and not like put the brakes on you. That's what I wanted to do with you today. So what you see on the screen are a way to get in touch with me. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box or the chat, as people already done. Let's see, there's a question. What's the most common reference documentation to obtain the API request details for each call? Is it Swagger? Okay. You're not going to like this answer. When we develop APIs, we need to document them. One way to do this is Swagger. Swagger is a tool that extracts documentation information from the code and maybe creates like a Swagger server that these things can be applied to. This is a two-way thing. I can define in Swagger and create code from that. So the answer to your question, where do I get the documentation, depends really on the developers of the APIs that you're actually checking. If it's in the same company, it will be easier as long as you get it from the developers and they actually do that. If it's internal and the developers don't do that, you need to like go shake them and get the information that you need. If it's an external contract like exposed APIs from Google or whatever, you'll find good documentation where it is. How good a documentation? That's another separate issue, because a documentation is something that basically is a product of what we're doing, not just a production code. So if we treat it like a product, needs to be reviewed and tested, or whatever we're doing in order to create quality product, we need to have quality documentation. So it may be like you see that for a CRUD application, maybe it's going to be enough, like add a record of user. But if there are side effects and the developers did not write it, you will not know. So the answer is it comes from the developers. Sometimes it comes from product if the organization takes these kind of things seriously. If it's an internal API, like my team creates an API that somebody else uses, it really depends on my goodwill, how well I document stuff. Because if it's internal, there's no accountability for like the contract. So you may not get good documentation. That's the answer. Swagger is a tool. It's not a database of things. If you have ideas of what you would like to see on future webinars, write them down also to get in touch with me, things that you're interested in. I'll see if I can do something about that. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.